On today's episode,
the godfather of power dynamics, Robert Greene.
Power begins from within. If you're aware of who you are, if you're aware of what you're good at, what you're not good at, you will be a person of power.
The point of self-awareness is to shut down that internal monologue that you have about yourself so that you can be more strategic.
The ability to understand what motivates, what incentivizes the other person is the key to success in life. Words are used to deceive you, to disguise what people are really thinking.
I have never put it together in my own mind that succinctly, but you're absolutely right.
It's time to go inside Quest with host Tom Bilyeu, president and co-founder of the second fastest growing private company in America. And now he's uncovering the universal principles of success.
I can tell you right now what principle number one is: follow your passion.
Inside Quest starts right now.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Inside Quest. We are the gymnasium for the mind. And if you're into personal power like I am, today's guest is for you. He is the godfather of power dynamics and skill acquisition. Please help me in welcoming the best-selling author of the 48 Laws of Power, the 33 Strategies of War, and his newest book, Mastery, Robert Greene. Robert, thank you, honestly, man, for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. I get asked a lot about what books I read because for me, and you actually have a quote about this, which unfortunately I don't have at my fingertips, but basically you should be reading more than people that are getting a professional education. And if you carry that with you the rest of your life, you'll be able to put yourself in a great position. And I really believe that, and I've learned a lot more since I got out of college than I did in college. And so putting together a list for people of those essential books really forced me to clarify those, because there's only like 15 books on it, forced me to clarify what I think are the most important books for somebody who's trying to go from what I call trapped in the matrix, lost in a job that they don't love, whatever, and find their path to mastery. So needless to say, your book is on that list. It's utterly phenomenal.
Just one of my books?
Just one of the books on that. It's all themed, but this is why I wanted to get you on the show today so that we can talk about them all, though I have high hopes for your new book.
Okay. I might make the list, you mean?
Yes, for sure. On human nature. Guys, you may not have heard it here first, but he's working on a new book on human nature, which I could not be more excited about. If you've read all of his books, you'll see that there's one theme. This guy clearly has to have just a deep understanding of people and how they work. So anyway, without further ado, your books all center around power. If you could just define power for us.
Well, there are many ways to do that, but I like to look at it this way. Most of things that happen in life you have no control over. You don't control your parents, where you're born, when you were born, what era, really what schools you go to, anything like that. And then beyond that, just things happen to you. And so the way I look at it, maybe 95, 96% of what happens in life you have no control over. It's just circumstances coming at you. But you have a little margin of control. And power is the ability to increase that tiny little margin to 4, 5, 6%. And how do you increase that margin of control over circumstances, over people? Well, the gist of it is controlling yourself. Self-mastery. Power begins from within. If you're aware of who you are, if you're aware of what you're good at, what you're not good at, if you're able to see how emotions kind of govern your life, if you can learn what your weaknesses are and how to control them, you can't ever get complete control, but awareness is almost enough. Slowly through this process of knowing who you are and understanding other people and how they operate so you don't make stupid mistakes in life, you can increase that little tiny margin more and more and more, and you will be a person of power. So law number one in the 48 Laws of Power is called never outshine the master. And almost every single person in the world has violated that law, myself included. Basically how it works, you're so eager to impress your boss or whomever in your new job that you try so hard that you make him or her feel insecure. Like maybe you're younger and better than they are, and because of that, you're fired, or something bad happens to you, and you never know why. Understanding that law of power could save you the incredible misery that comes from being fired without having any idea what happened to you. So that kind of little bits of knowledge adding up with this awareness of who you are and how other people operate, you're going to slowly gain a little bit more of that margin and be a person of power.
I've read that stat from you before that 95, 96% of the world is out of our control. It took my breath away. I didn't want to believe it, but as you start going through the things that you really can't control and you see how legion they are.
Yeah.
So if we embrace that, and if we embrace that the most important thing that we can do is control ourselves, and I think Da Vinci has a quote about that, right?
Yeah, I think it's something to the effect that mastery is basically self-mastery, is the gist of the quote.
Right, which I think is very powerful, especially coming from somebody as accomplished as him. So what are the steps? You talk a lot about self-awareness in mastery, and I think very powerfully, and it all culminates with you pointing out that the point of self-awareness is to shut down that internal monologue that you have about yourself, so that you can focus on what that person is thinking and feeling about you, so that you can be more strategic. Walk us through the example you give in the book about Benjamin Franklin and how he used that so profoundly.
Yeah, so it's a chapter in Mastery on social intelligence, which is basically the subject of my next book. And the idea is that we're social animals. And so you could be technically brilliant at what you do, but if you're bad with people, it doesn't mean anything. You're going to completely neutralize your talent or your skill or anything that you've learned in life. So Benjamin Franklin was someone who was extremely ambitious. He was very young and very talented and very precocious. He was a great writer at the age of 14 and 15. He's already publishing himself. He was just a mad genius, but he was terrible with people. He irritated his brother, who he was working for, and sort of deceived him about these letters he was writing to the newspaper and tricking him into...
Silence do good?
Yes. He was tricking his brother into publishing his own letters under a pseudonym because his brother thought he was too young to write for the newspaper. And when the brother discovered this, he was furious and had a
Didn't he confess it to his brother?
He confessed it thinking that his brother would be proud to know that Benjamin had written these amazing letters supposedly written by an 80-year-old woman. This guy had basically mimicked the voice of an older woman. It was amazing. And his brother instead was furious. And so he didn't understand why he wouldn't have been proud of him. He kept making these same stupid mistakes, thinking that people would be impressed, would like him because he was so smart and young, and instead they were really offended by what he did. The ability to understand what motivates, what incentivizes the other person is like the key to success in life. You know, because if you know what it is that you're looking for, what you, Tom, are looking for in this moment, and I can give it to you, I have incredible power over you.
Right.
So Benjamin Franklin says, I'm going to stop this pattern of being inside my head, of thinking only of myself and my own ideas and what I think are my great dreams. And I'm going to shut that monologue off, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to immerse myself in other people and figure them out. He was a great tinkerer and inventor, and he had a scientific mind. And all he did was he said, I'm going to apply that science to people. And it completely changed his life around.
Now, I know you've worked a lot with the internal monologue. I know that you use Zen meditation. Is that partly why, to quiet that monologue, or are there other reasons that you're using Zen?
It's probably the main reason. I was about to write Mastery when I took this up. And writing a book for me is almost like doing 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali and George Fraser. These books kill me in the end. My digestive tract is ruined. I'm exhausted. I can't sleep. Wow. And I'm literally at the end of my third book, I thought I was going to die. They just kill me because of the intensity that I'm trying to, the thought process. So I thought, I've got to, if I don't do something about it, Mastery will literally kill me. So I decided I'm going to take up meditation, among other things. And I found the benefits were I can quiet my mind, I can set myself up for the rest of the day, and it really, really, really helped unleash creative energies in me that I didn't even know I had.
Now, are those creative? So you've talked about the human mind works on two levels, and in doing so, it's not only taking in information from the outside world, but it's running it against things that it's already encountered to find interesting connections.
Yeah.
Do you think meditation is allowing you to make more interesting connections because of the quiet?
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to go too deeply into this. It's a theory of creativity that's not my own, but that I use a lot in mastery. And basically, the idea is that ideas are generated in the unconscious. They're not generated consciously. Your conscious mind is very limited what you can hold in your memory.
Right.
But unconsciously, in your subconscious, when you're asleep, when you're dreaming, the mind is filled with thousands upon thousands of ideas and things that are there, that are lingering there. And connections are being made all of the time. And occasionally those connections float up to your conscious mind and you have a brilliant idea about how to do something. Well, when you're meditating, you're almost like in a dream state. You're associating in a really free manner. I'll be deep in a meditation, and I do it for close to an hour in the morning. It's very intense.
Wow.
Your memories from childhood that I've completely forgotten about, smells, senses, things come bubbling up to the mind. When you're able to still your mind, you're freeing up all of that kind of unconscious stuff that's there, and connections are happening in a much faster way. And I had just some of the best ideas when I was meditating. As everyone has experienced sometimes when you're showering, you have a great idea because you're not thinking about anything, they just come to you. And that's sort of the same idea.
Charles de Gaulle said, I know people expect me to be the guy hiding in the quotes.
I love that quote.
But in reality, I would much rather be myself. To me, are like that, right? Reading your books, especially the 48 Laws of Power, which is so consciously aware of, how about this? It looks objectively at power struggles. It makes no judgment about whether they're good or bad.
Right.
And in not making that judgment, stands so far outside of the norm, because normally people are like, ooh, going for power is icky. And you're like, look, it's a reality. People are doing it. So meeting you and seeing like a normal guy who's got hopes and dreams and passions and he's pursuing them and he's doing Zen meditation, it's not really what people expect. Do you get that a lot?
Yeah, I do. I love that Charles de Gaulle quote. I think about it all the time because basically what he was saying is people expect to meet Charles de Gaulle.
Right.
And I'm not Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle is a name and is an image. I'm not that person, but I have to become him when I'm in the public. So I've learned people don't expect me to be who I am. When I first met 50 Cent, I wrote a book with 50 Cent.
Oh, yeah.
He expected me to be this kind of older guy with gray hair who was just like emanating power. And he was sort of probably disappointed. Because I'm not that. And I was expecting this mean thug who was going to make me shiver when I was in front of him. And he's not like that at all either. So, you're not that image that people expect. And sometimes you have to play that image. So when I go do interviews on television or something, I have to become Robert Greene. But really, I prefer just being who I am here today and revealing the fact that I am kind of a normal person, and I do meditate and I have, all sorts of weird habits and stuff.
Right. Now you attack things from weird and unique angles that I think makes your writing really sticky with people, and is why I'm so eager for you to write about human nature, because I think it'll be from an angle that other people just aren't able to capture. And I may be totally misreading it, but in reading the 48 Laws of Power and reading the 50th Law, it feels very different, even though clearly about power, it feels very different from the power that you talk about in Mastery. And I'll go back to Benjamin Franklin for a second, and you associate him with empathy. Now, people hear empathy. I use that word all the time, trying to explain to people, don't sympathize with people if they're doing woe is me. Don't get on your knees and woe is me with them, but offer them empathy and understanding and help them back. And there's a very sort of light, beautiful thing to that. So they feel like different angles on power. Like, to you, are they one and the same, or are they really different ways to look at the same thing?
I see what you're saying. It's a very interesting question. So the 48 Laws of Power was really about the kind of the political games that we've all witnessed. If you've ever worked in an office, I have this statistic. I say about 1 out of 10 people are like great manipulators. And just takes one person and they can ruin your life. And there's always somebody like that. So the 48 Laws of Power is about that game that people are playing and how to be aware of it and not get trapped in getting emotional and not being so naive. And so there's not a lot of empathy in that book, because I really want to open your eyes. I was a naive person when I entered Hollywood, which was the main inspiration for the 48 Laws. I was just this stupid kid that had no idea how Machiavellian Hollywood is. And so the book is informed for people like me, so there's not a lot of empathy, because I'm trying to say, look, I'm shaking you up. Don't be so stupid and naive. When the doors are closed, this is what the power people are doing, and you need to be aware of it. But the empathy is a really important quality. It's a really important quality. It's a huge subject in my next book, and it played a very big role in mastery. It also played a role in a book, The Art of Seduction. But essentially, I'm trying to say, to understand people on a high level, not just understand the political games and the manipulation, but to really understand them on a deep level so that you can influence them, etc. You have to be able to get inside their skin. And we were born with this natural talent. Every single person is born with this talent for getting inside the minds of other people. It's something that you're not even aware of. Autistic people are aware of because they don't possess this power and they see other humans doing it. It's basically the idea that I can actually sit here and imagine what you, Tom, might be thinking right at this moment. And if I take that deeply enough for 10, 15, 20 minutes, I can actually maybe get inside your mind a little bit. We possess this like an animal quality, but we don't know how to use it. We don't practice it. It's like a muscle that never is being used.
All right, then right now's the time. How do we help these guys learn to use it? Because I think you are on to the secret to the universe.
Yeah.
And my partners and I break the company into three things. So there's people, process, and product. And I do the people. This is what I do. Like, this is all I focus on, is trying to get better at projecting myself into their mind, thinking the way that they think. And in this company, the goal being to help them achieve whatever goal they have. So help them. How do they need to conceive of that? To what end are they using that skill to make their own dreams come true?
Well, I wish I had my next book written, because in that book I reveal all of the secrets.
Do you want us to hang out for a few minutes while you pen it down?
I don't think so. Give me a year and a half.
I'm patient, but I'm not that patient about it.
Okay, so the first thing is, you're not aware of this power that you have. You're walking around in life, I'm not critical because I'm the same, sort of sleepwalking. You're inside hearing your own thoughts day in, day out, like a continually, circling loop in your head. And you're not aware of the fact that if you stop that and you look at other people, a world opens up to you. So what's the first component of that world? Nonverbal communication. 95% of what really matters in communication between people is not through words. Words are used to deceive you, to disguise what people are really thinking. But in people's body language, in their face, are you even aware that there's a difference between a real smile and a fake smile? You probably are, but how do you recognize a fake smile? Most of the smiles that people have are fake. The eyes don't go up, the cheekbones aren't prominent, the lips don't go up. Recognizing a fake smile from a real smile, already you understand if someone is really enjoying you or if they're just pretending. You can't get that from their words. You can get it from their body language, the tenseness of their muscles. You can get it from their gestures, from the tone of their voice, whether it goes up or down at the end of a sentence. There's a whole world of nonverbal communication that you are just simply ignorant of. It's as if you were in France, born there, and you couldn't speak French. You can learn that language. The other aspect is understanding what really motivates people. What really is the key? You're thinking that they have the same values as you do, but they don't have the same values. Their values maybe come from a completely different place. How do you sit there and, by talking to them and understanding them and watching them and observing them, how can you get a feel for the different culture that they come from and the different set of values that they have? There are things that you can learn by talking and observing people particularly over time. If you've all had the experience, if you're in a relationship, I've been in a relationship for, God, I don't even want to say, 18 years. You know when you've been with someone for 18 years that who they were when you first met them and who you know now, there's not the same. You've reached a level of understanding that's pretty profound. You don't even have to think about it. You know what they're thinking, right? You can get that with people over time if you're paying attention and you're intense. In 3 months of interaction here at the Quest office, observing, you're going to deepen your knowledge of someone that when you first met them you had no idea. But the main idea is there's that knowledge is available and you're not using it because you're not aware of this secret language that's going on.
All right, so let's just get into the top 3,500 or so of the millions of things that we could do to help them. So in your book Mastery, you break things down, and some of the really interesting power struggle dynamics that you've talked about in the 48 Laws, you bring into the book as to how to orchestrate a mentor, to not outshine the master, things like that, to make sure that you're able to get the tutelage. But then you also go into the nitty-gritty of actually acquiring a skill and the 10,000 hour principle and all that stuff. So applying that to emotional intelligence and simply reading other people, what are just a step or two that they can take down that path starting today?
Well, I mean, the first thing to understand is the most important, and that it is a skill. So if you want to play the piano, you can't just sit down and suddenly play. You've got to practice it, and you've got to practice it every day. And if you practice an hour a day, you're going to get better at it. Okay, dealing with people is a skill, and we don't like to think of it like that. I got a lot of flack for the art of seduction because people would say, I don't want to think of seduction and love and romance as like a skill, as something that I have to learn. You kind of de-romanticize it. Well, it's not quite like that, you know? Learning to court and seduce someone is actually a skill, I'm afraid to say it. And there are people that are really good at it. So you can actually learn. It's the same thing with people. Get out of this mindset that you just have to be who you are. I can't use the word fucking.
Please, go for it.
It's a fucking myth that you just have to be who you are. Yeah, you can be who you are when you're home. Not always either, when the door closes. But when you're here in your office or you're out in the work world, you can't be who you are because that doesn't work very well. You're playing a role, you're being the good worker, etc. Well, it's also a skill in how to learn how to deal with people and understand their mindset. So if it's a skill, you've got to practice it. And if you've got to practice it, you've got to put in hours. So every day, you're going to give yourself a goal. It's very easy for me to tell you to turn off that internal monologue because even as I'm saying it, you're still going through it, right? All right, I'm going to sit here now for an hour. I'm going to make myself not have a single thought. I'm going to absorb myself in when I'm meeting with Tom. I'm going to completely shut that out and I'm going to sit there and observe. I'm going to take away 3 things that I have not observed before about Tom. Okay, that's my goal. You got to take baby steps. You can't suddenly become Benjamin Franklin overnight. Okay, now I'm meeting Tom an hour every day. Today, I'm going to sit here. I'm not going to listen to myself. And I'm going to pick up 3 things that I had never observed from Tom before. For instance, he always tends to sit like this when he's really interested in something. What does that mean? Okay, those are the kind of steps where you're basically stopping that monologue, immersing yourself in the other person, trying to come away with 3 things, 4 things, using your mirror neurons, which I discuss a lot in there, your natural empathy. And then the most important thing of all, you later analyze what you learned. Because if you just simply observe, great, I learned that Tom likes to sit like that, but what does it mean? It probably means something when you're not there with them, because if you do that when you're with them, you can't be in the moment. When I get back to my office, I'm going to sit there and think, what did that really mean? What does that say about Tom? Well, he's very relaxed. Okay, now you're observing and then you're analyzing. You do that. You make it a skill. You decide you're going to observe new things every day from the same people that you deal with, and you analyze it. You're already on your way.
Wow. So in your book, Mastery, you go into great detail about what it actually takes to acquire a skill. It's really phenomenal. Guys, the reason that it's on the list is for some of these examples. The one I'd like you to talk about now, so that you understand how many things are going to get in your way. And I want to bring everything back to what he said in the beginning. Know thyself, right? Understand yourself. That's step one. If you don't understand yourself, if you don't really embody that Da Vinci quote about the greatest form of mastery is mastery over oneself, if you don't embody that, you're in real trouble. And the reason is it's going to stop you from seeing opportunities to learn. So in your book, you go, and unfortunately I forget the guy's name, but he went into the Amazon and he tried to learn the Piraha language.
Daniel Everett, yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
In what sense?
And how his feeling of superiority became a learning disability.
The gist of it is, why are children able to learn so quickly and so deeply, and an adult can't? So, for instance, he was sent to this tribe in Brazil as a missionary to translate the Bible into their language. It's a language called the Piraha. And it's probably the most difficult language on the planet to learn. It's been recognized as it. No Westerner has been able to crack this language. It's so weird. And he went there and he goes, well, the children can speak it. 2-year-old kids are learning how to speak Piraha. Why can't I? Why are children able to learn and an adult can't? The reason is children don't think that they're superior. They don't think that they already understand the world. They're this small, they're weak, they're defenseless. They have to learn or they're gonna die. They have to learn how to speak the language, they have to learn what's going on with their parents, or they're literally gonna die. And when we were children, our minds were completely open. We were sponges for knowledge because we never had the sense of, oh, I am great. I know everything about the universe. I know what's politically correct. I know that the Republicans or the Democrats are good or evil. I understand it all. I'm wonderful. So that feeling of superiority, it sneaks into you as you get older, and it stops you from learning because you don't think you need to learn anymore. Whereas a child begins with them, I am weak, I am defenseless, I am inferior, and I have to learn. You apply that to what I was talking about in social intelligence, or to working here at your office, where you are literally in the position of a child. You don't know what you need to know, and you have to be a sponge, and you have to observe things that you hadn't been observing before.
Yeah, it's really, it's fascinating how many of the assumptions that you make are going to either hold you back or push you forward in. So I had the good fortune of following a relatively straightforward example of a mentorship from your book. That was, I met guys that were way ahead of me, and I just had no problem submitting myself to them, and truly there was no sense of loss of ego or anything. I was so hungry for what they knew that I was like, I'm going to sit at your feet like a student, and I'm going to drink in as much knowledge as I can. But then as you begin to acquire that knowledge, and this is where it gets dangerous, you start acquiring the knowledge, you start feeling more powerful, you try your new skills, they work, you feel more powerful, and all of a sudden you run the risk of not thinking like a student anymore, not being willing to subjugate yourself to that. And this may seem like a weird example, but when we started here manufacturing, by that point I had my feet under me. I'd been running a business for 8.5 years. I kind of knew what I was doing, but I knew at a really visceral level the danger of not being a student in all things and being stupid enough to think that I knew something. And a quote that I read in the book has stuck with me forever, and it said, "Genius is a young man's game." That scared me, right? Because I don't want that to be true. I don't want any day of my life as I get older to be less valuable than in my youth. And then he goes on to explain why it doesn't have to be a young man's game. But it's basically, genius is a young man's game typically because you start learning stuff that closes down your world, and you start making less and less novel connections like you've talked about. So if you can keep your mind open, if you can be a student in all things, if you're never afraid to be inferior, if you're not afraid to approach the language, and in the story in the book about the Piraha that you give, it's finally when he realizes that I have to go hunting with him, right? Like I need to go out and really experience their life. And then suddenly he truly was at their mercy. And if they didn't take care of him, he would die. He's lost, and there's animals in the jungle that will happily eat him.
Yeah.
So, and in that finally realizes that he's got this learning disability, which is superiority. So when we started the company, one day, it's one of my favorite stories to remind myself of something. The toilet overflowed and there was literal human feces on the floor. And
a great story.
You now have this moment of like, hey, who's gonna pick that up? And to remind myself that at all times you have to be willing to put yourself in the absolute, quote unquote lowest position. Went for it, and
you picked it up.
Yeah, for sure. And that became, that became cultural, and people see that and they see, okay, cool. Like that's what it means to really be a student in all things. That's what it means to not be afraid to take that, the seat at the bottom. But it opens you up to just massive degrees of knowledge. So, do you have tricks that you use for ensuring that genius does not become a young man's game? That your books truly get better and better over time?
You know what it is? It's actually, I don't know if I recommend it because it's kind of neurotic, but it works. Basically, every time I begin a book, I'm deathly afraid of failing. I feel like, oh, it's not going to sell as well as the last book. I'm losing it. I got to go back to square one. I can't rest on my laurels. I can't just churn out a book. I really got to grind it out. I got to do more research. I got to think harder. And actually, there's a wisdom behind it, which is each project, each thing that you do in life, you have to kind of create that feeling in the gut, like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off. I don't know if I can go 12 rounds with Floyd Mayweather this time. I don't know it. I'm back to where I was in the beginning, You got to feel a little bit of that nervousness and that excitement and that sense of I've got to build it now, and you're starting from zero. And that's sort of how I approach it, and I think that keeps it fresh. And I also try never to do the same book twice. Everything has to be a different feel, a different subject, structured a little differently, so I keep everything fresh. The secret really to success in life, I have to say, is retaining, I talk about this in Mastery, is retaining your childlike qualities. If you're completely a child, that's not going to work.
So what qualities are useful to keep that from just becoming a cliche?
You mean, how do you do it?
No, what specifically, when you say childlike qualities, but not all of them, which ones do you want to keep?
Well, you don't want like temper tantrums and things like that.
Good tip.
You're wanting to keep that openness of mind and that curiosity and that sense of wonder, and which is what gets back to what I said. Knock that thing out of your brain that you think you know what the universe is like, that you understand the galaxies and what's going on. You really don't have any idea. You need to get back that sense of wonder and excitement and openness and flexibility of mind. If that's all that you have, you're just going to be a child, and children don't make anything. They don't invent an iPhone, and children don't create a movie. You'll just be like a child. No, you have to have your skill, your talent, and all of that. But if you're able to maintain a fluid mind, now I've called it since Mastery, a yoga for the mind. How do you literally stretch your mind so it becomes as flexible as, so you can do a down dog mentally. And negative capability is rule number one for being a creative person. And if you don't follow anything else in Mastery, that would be enough. Negative capability comes from the great poet John Keats in the 19th century. He was trying to understand why Shakespeare was so creative, and he decided that he had negative capability. And it's basically the ability to keep two ideas that contradict each other in your mind without feeling uncomfortable, without having to come to a conclusion. You can think about something without rushing to judgment and conclusion. You can be in the moment. You can say, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. And you don't have to decide whether it's A, B, or C. You're open to adopting 3 or 4 different viewpoints. For instance, I'll give you just a quick example. I'm writing a book on human nature, and there's 2 opposing views on human nature. One is it has never changed. We are who we are 10 million years ago or 500,000 years ago. And the other is human nature is cultural. It constantly evolves. Now, I happen to be of the school that human nature hasn't changed, but I am completely open to the other idea, and I'm reading books from the other idea, and I'm incorporating ideas from that side because it has definitely legitimate components and arguments to be made. So that's how I'm keeping myself from being rigidly stamped with this one simple idea, because nothing in life is simple or is black and white. Everything is nuanced.
Yeah, I love that in your books. That really comes out in everything. And when you read the 48 Laws and then you end every chapter by saying, and now think of this in the complete opposite way, or ending the book by saying, now forget everything that I've said, you have to act in accordance with your, oh, for sure. And they're incredibly powerful. And I was saying to him before we started, one of the things I find most powerful in his teachings are the usability of it, right? And so that's what, in the books that I try to bring to people and the authors and things we try to bring onto the show, it's all people that are giving you things that are actually usable, that you can go home and you can do his form of Zen meditation. You can go home and you can start learning how to read people and then not in the moment analyze it, but analyze it when you get back. And they're usable and they will have impact. And on those lines, I want to go back to something that you said a few minutes ago, and you were talking about capturing that childlike state and finding enthusiasm. You've got a really awesome quote. Let's see if I'm going to paraphrase it, but I'm going to be pretty close. Not building your life around passion is a recipe for disaster and pain. It's something like that. But then, because a lot of people say that, right? Like, oh, you got to live a life of passion, blah, blah, blah. But you take it to the next step, and it's utterly fascinating, which is, if you love music, don't quit your job and play guitar. Like, you're going to have a hard time feeding your family. But you have advice for them. What is that advice?
Yeah, but people say, live your passion. So these are cliches, and nobody changes their life based on a cliche. You've got to do hard work, and to do hard work, you have to have a roadmap. Somebody has to show you steps that to get there. And so, I really, really, really want to help people. I really want them to become entrepreneurs. But I think working for yourself, starting your own company, doing what you love should be everybody's goal. Okay, how do you really help people? To say follow your passion, that's just so simple and easy. There's a process. The process begins by first knowing what you really love. And believe me, I do a lot of consulting. A lot of people have no self-awareness. They don't even really know what it is that they were meant to do in life. They loved music when they were a kid, but then they got into law or whatever because of their parents, and then they don't know who they are anymore. Well, do I really like music? You got to go through that process first of figuring out what it is that really connects to you in a deep, visceral way, what you loved when you were a kid, what still excites you. Once you go through that and you understand it and you've got some clarity about it, okay, how do I incorporate that in my life?
You call those primal inclinations, right?
Yes, and everybody has them. I talk about all the geniuses in history who demonstrated this. Einstein with a compass, Steve Jobs when he's 5 years old, walks by an electronics store with his dad and suddenly he's going, wow, look at those gadgets, those weird gadgets. Oh, that's so exciting. Really great geniuses and creative people have those moments when they're 5, 6 years old. And you probably did, but you're not remembering them. Anyway, connecting with that primal part of yourself and then actually doing something practical. And that's the real trick in life. So if you're 23 years old, it's a little easier. I love music, but I'm not a musician because I've not been practicing. I just love music. But I have a real good sense of business. I've been studying business and I have an MBA, et cetera. Okay, I've got to now find a way to craft a career that combines my knowledge of business and my love of music. And if I follow that and I do it smart and I plan it out, eventually what starts out with more business than music will end up becoming more creative as I get better and better at it. You've got to figure out how you can take your experience and move in a different direction and be practical and take small steps and still feed my family, but pursue something that I love. And the reason is, if you don't do this, you're going to end up in deep shit because you're going to turn 40 years old. You're going to be at a job that you hate, you're going to be really depressed, and you're going to be at an age where you don't have the energy to make a big change and you're going to be screwed. And particularly in the world today where things are moving so quickly and there's so many dead-end careers, you've got to be light on your feet, and you've got to be, I think, have an entrepreneurial spirit. You don't want to be at that point. So it is life and death. You're not thinking of it right now as life and death, but it is. It really is.
You've got a cool quote. The pain and boredom we experience in the initial stages of learning a skill strengthens our mind.
Yeah.
How do you prepare somebody to survive that initial stage of boredom and pain?
Well, pain is great. You've got to embrace pain. Pain is pleasure. You've got to make the connection between the physical and the mental. When you work out, it's painful. I do long distance swimming is like my main workout. I also do other things, but that's my main workout. I'm on like mile 1, and I'm like, God, man, this is fun. I'm so bored, and I'm really gonna collapse. But when I'm finished, I am like, oh man, I've got so much energy, and it feels so good, and I pushed past it. Well, you know that when you're exercising, when you're running or you're working out or whatever, it hurts, but it leads to something pleasurable. You have to be able to translate that to mental things. And if you make that switch in your mind, it is mind-blowing what can happen to you. If the boredom of learning something technical, and you're able to say to yourself, wow, I'm going to master this bit of coding after a few months, and just think of what it's going to allow me to do. Okay, so the boredom now is actually not so bad, because I can imagine the powers that it's going to lead to. I'm not going to skip the steps. I'm still going to learn, but I'm thinking of all of that post-workout feeling I'm going to have. You've got to be able to understand, embrace pain. Pain is something to embrace. If there's no resistance to you, you're not going to get anywhere in life. Who are the most messed up people in the world? Spoiled kids. Kids who are given everything, who have a rich father or mother, and they don't have to work or try. They are the most messed up people you'll ever meet.
All right, you're writing a book on human nature. Why is that true?
Because they have no limits, they have no resistance. They don't have to push against anything. They don't have to go like that to get somewhere. Does that
atrophy something in the brain, do you think?
Well, it's one of the laws of human nature. One of the laws is about what I call necessity. We are animals of necessity. When we have to discover or build something, we build it if our life is on the line. That's how we're genetically primed from several million years ago. And when there's no necessity, when we don't have to do something, we just lie around and watch television and smoke pot. If there's nothing holding you, resisting you that you have to push against, you just turn into flab.
That is so incredibly powerful, and I hope that that's a chapter in your books. I'm desperate to read more about that.
It is.
Do you know Peter Diamandis by any chance? X Prize?
Yes.
He has Peter's laws, and one of his laws is when faced without a challenge, create one.
Yeah.
Hearing the context that you just gave about us being animals of necessity, which I love very much, and am immediately going to adopt within my repertoire. I hope that's okay.
Fine.
Full credit to Robert.
You don't even have to credit me.
That really sheds new light on why that would be so powerful to create obstacle, difficulty, necessity when it's not present.
Ryan talks about that. So I wrote a whole book on that. The obstacle is the way. Yeah. Well, it's very powerful. I have in my war book, I have a chapter on the death ground strategy. I think it's one of the more important chapters in the book. And the idea comes from Sun Tzu. And when you put an army on death ground, it fights 3 times as hard. And what is death ground? Death ground is, let's say you're an army and you're fighting on the beach. And if the enemy pushes you back, you all drown. Okay, you've got to fight twice as hard because you're going to die. Well, we're the same way. When we have to do something, we work 3 times harder. And I had an experience with that with Mastery, where I was really late in finishing the book. And I had 2 chapters left, the 2 longest, hardest chapters. And the publisher said, Robert, You have 11 weeks to finish those 2 chapters or we're canceling your book.
Oh.
Because you're so late. That was death ground. Because if they cancel it, fuck, what am I going to do? But I can't do it in 11 weeks. Well, I did it.
Wow.
I worked, I just found the energy. So when you're put in that situation of necessity, you work that way. You have to put yourself on death ground on purpose. That's the trick in life.
You've talked about that before, and you draw a really fascinating conclusion, which is, there's a quote, the depth of our learning is tied to the depth of our focus.
Well, I know, for instance, like just to give you an example of how to do that, Thomas Edison was a great believer in that, and Thomas Edison's one of the greatest entrepreneurs that ever lived. And what he would do is, for instance, he would talk about a project before he had even really thought it through to the press. And that meant his reputation was now on the line. Yeah. If he now didn't go and spend 4,000 hours of insane work to actually figure out what he had just blabbed to the press, his reputation would be ruined. Oh, he's talking about electric light and he suddenly doesn't do anything. It put him on death ground. All right, I talked about it, now I have to do it. That's just an example.
That's a great example. All right, before we get onto your Twitter feed, which I really want to spend some time on, if you had one piece of advice for these guys, any one concept from one of your books or your upcoming book, the thing that they should just put in their mind and let that be a seed that grows into something?
Well, they should probably just read my books.
I'll second that.
Well, the idea, I'll just give it a little more flesh, is the idea of self-awareness. So giving it more flesh means what? It means that each person, I make this point in Mastery, is born unique. And it's kind of one of those cliches, but there's science to it. The science is your DNA will never be repeated. The way your brain is wired will never be repeated. Your experiences in life, you're one of a kind. And it's an amazing thought if you think about it. Of all of the billions of humans that have lived and will ever live, there will never be anybody who is wired like you are wired. And the problem in life is as you get older, you become more and more like other people. You spend a lot of your time thinking about what other people like, and you're not aware of what you like. You go into careers because you listen to other people. And you're not in tune with something really special, and I like to use the word weird because I think weird is a good word. There's something weird about you. It can be bad, but it can also be really good, you know? And you're not mining that weirdness. You're letting it go. You're becoming a copy of other people. And if you can take a step back and say, what is the goal? When the goal is when I'm 40 years old or 35 or whatever, I'm going to create a business that reflects me and my strangeness and who I am. That's what you want to come to, but you're not going to get there unless you're aware of it and embrace what makes you different. Now, it doesn't mean you, as I said before, that you're not practical. There's got to be a practical roadmap to getting there. But if you look at all of the brilliant people who've succeeded in life, if you look at a Steve Jobs, you look at an Elon Musk, etc., there's nobody else out there like them. You're never going to be able to pinpoint one other person like them. They are completely unique, and those are the people that end up having power in the world. So if you're going to be able to create that website, that blog, that whatever it is, that startup that is different, that has its own niche and reflects you, something good will happen from it.
I always like to tell people the moment that I fell in love with them. The moment that I fell in love with you, my biggest frustration in life is very, very powerful words become trite and cliche over time because people don't get to the real meaning behind them. Which, in fact, one of your favorite quotes, the Nietzsche quote, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. You find a way to go beyond the cliche to something that's a true insight. And to reference a concept that you talk a lot about in The Art of Seduction, you say to truly be interesting to your victim, to use your words, you need to be contradictory. You need to reveal or hint at some internal contradiction in yourself. And so here we have this guy who is writing about power and truly in a Machiavellian way, like just uncovering it, the cold hard truths about it. And yet, that person who I would expect to laugh at the cliche of you're a beautiful, unique snowflake, spends a lot of time very eloquently explaining to people the importance of recognizing that you're a beautiful and unique snowflake, and then goes on to explain why that's meaningful. I love that about you. And
Thank you.
Really was something that drew me into your universe.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I've never heard that expressed that way. That's very nice.
For sure.
Thank you.
Cool. Now to the Twitter feed.
Okay.
Boys and girls, if you are not already following @RobertGreene on Twitter, you should be. He's got just an amazing feed. He's throwing out nuggets from his books religiously. They're culled to be just the cream of the crop. Every one of them is impactful. There's not a wasted letter in his feeds. Well worth checking out. I want to go through some of them that,
Sure.
and these are just the recent ones. I mean, this stuff is going on all day, every day. And just have you comment on them. So here's a recent one. Control people's perceptions of reality and you control them.
It's a great military strategy. Comes from the great Colonel Boyd, who invented what's known as the OODA loop. Are you familiar with the OODA loop?
I am not.
Well, it's a military concept, and John Boyd was a fighter pilot in the U.S. military, one of the great modern strategists of all time. And being a fighter pilot is not like anything else in life, because you have to make decisions in microseconds or you're dead. And you have to strategize in microseconds. And he came up with the OODA loop, which means orientation, observation, decision, action. You have to observe what is happening, orient yourself into the context of it, decide what you need to do, and act. And people whose OODA loop has been disrupted, they can't observe, they can't orient themselves, lose contact with reality. And you lose contact with reality in 1 second and you're a dead fighter pilot. So the job is to control the other fighter pilot's perception of reality so that they make a mistake, you can get on their tail and you can kill them. And so in military terms, if you can change how people perceive reality and make them think they see what they don't see, you've got power over them. Well, that applies to advertising, it applies to political campaigns. If you can set your enemy on a red herring and make them think that they're chasing something important, but it isn't important, you have power over them. Your contact with reality is your power in life. And if you lose it, you're in trouble, and that's what that's about.
I love that. All right. The only real ending is death. Everything else is a transition.
My life is sort of an example of that, in that I was kind of a loser until I was about 35, 36 years old, at least according to my parents. In that I wandered through life trying different jobs. I did construction work in Greece. I was a tour operator in Dublin. I was a teacher of English in Barcelona. I wrote screenplays, and I had 50 different jobs. And then my parents were about like, well, what are you going to do in life? You know, this is ridiculous. And then I met this man who was a book packager, and he asked me for an idea for a book. And I kind of came up with the 48 Laws of Power, and he loved it, and he said, well, you've got to do that. But the moral of my story was all of those weird transitions and things that didn't mean anything, I could suddenly bring them all together in the 48 Laws of Power. All those awful, awful bosses I had worked for, all of those terrible jobs. I worked for a private detective agency out in Pasadena for a while. The most depressing job I've ever had in my life. Hollywood, these asshole directors. I could draw upon all of this weirdness and then all of the books that I'd read on history and create the 48 Laws of Power. So there were no deaths there. They were just transitions, I think, if that's what the point.
Oh, yeah, I'd love, it's exactly what I meant. Superiority is not a function of natural talent or privilege, but rather of time and experience.
We want to believe that there are shortcuts to success. We want to believe we can take a drug or we can do something that'll make it quick and easy. But the truth is, it takes grit. It takes persistence. It's the people like Thomas Edison, who had no education, who came from very poor background, who really end up making it in life because they are persistent and they don't settle for anything remotely mediocre. That's what ends up making you get ahead in the world, and it's really democratic, and that's what's so great about it. And that's what's so great about the world that we live in. We live in a time where things are not purely democratic, don't get me wrong, but they are much more democratic than they were in the past. A meritocracy, it's not about if you went to Yale or if your daddy is rich, it's about you, and you have the material to get there. And one last thing I'll say on that is, one of the people I interviewed for Mastery, Paul Graham, who has a company called Y Combinator in Silicon Valley, which is a sort of a training school for people who want to create a startup. He said that there is no correlation between where people went to university and their success at Y Combinator. There's zero correlation. Whether you went to Yale or you went to Dallas Community College, there's equal chance that you will be successful. I thought that was an amazing thing to hear, and he's seen that in action with tens of thousands of people.
All right, and then last one, and this one is most important to me. Earlier you talked about using fear to get you in the place where you're working hard enough to really do great work. And this is something that haunts my every waking moment. Eventually, the time that was not spent on learning skills will catch up with you, and the fall will be painful.
Yeah, it's hard to, in the moment, to understand what that means, because in the moment you can say, well, I've got a job and I'm alive and I feel pretty good. So it's hard to understand what could happen to you in 10 years in a visceral gut way of what it means to have failed in life. And to me, failure in life is not having money. It's not realizing your potential. You're 60 years old and you said, I could have been this and I never did it. That's like the worst thought I think anybody can have. And you don't think about it in the moment because your life is okay, but you've got to wake up and understand that there's an urgency here, and that if you're not practicing something now, if you're not aware, if you don't have a path towards something better, you're rotting on the vine, and that day of reckoning will come at some point, and it will be painful. You're not going to feel it suddenly, it'll be slow, but it'll come and it won't be good. And it doesn't mean like every day has to be a grind and has to be awful. Oftentimes, if you're in a bad job, just being aware that you now have a plan is enough to lift you out of that depression. Okay, I'm working at Burger King, but I know I'm going to get to this community college and get a degree here after I save enough money. Having a goal is will change you completely from being depressed or not taking care of yourself to being energized and moving in the right direction. So you don't think that there's a day of reckoning, but it's piling up as you're sitting here now, and you've got to be proactive about it.
Yeah, that to me is so critical, and I've talked endlessly about it, but for me it really is, how many skills can you acquire? How many interesting connections can you make?
Well, we live in a world, a skill economy, where people with actual genuine skills are going to be the ones that move the planet in the future. And it doesn't mean one skill, it means a set of skills that you combine in a unique way. And the world is so open to that now. Your starting of Quest is a prime example of combining strange and interesting skills. I mean, you could probably talk about that better than I can, but your screenwriting, your other failure, the things you've accumulated, now you create this monster called Quest based on all the different skills you've accumulated.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have never put it together in my own mind that succinctly, but you're absolutely right. Robert, thank you so much for being on the show. You can't imagine the degree of personal pleasure that I've gotten out of this, so thank you. Guys, I hope you got as much out of that as I did, and everybody out there watching. We are only beginning to scratch the surface of this man's work. He's got a slew of amazing books. You're going to want to read them all. Mastery, even the stuff that we talked about here today, is a wealth of information. You're going to go hear about Temple Grandin, amazing stories there about how Henry Ford turned massive, repeated failures into the empire that he did. Much more about Benjamin Franklin. Freddie Roach, we didn't even talk about Freddie Roach and the amazing journey of going from failed boxer to the perhaps greatest boxing coach of all time. They're all covered in the book. Read it, apply it, and it will put you on a path to your own mastery. Robert, again, thank you so much. If you're not following him, where can we find you other than Twitter? We know you're at Robert Greene. Where else?
www.powerseductionandwar.com.
Powerseductionandwar.com. The greatest URL of all time, boys and girls. I'm signing up today. So thank you so much for coming. We will be eagerly anticipating your book. If we can serve you in any way in the creation of that book, we will be human footstools if that's what it takes to bring this book into the world. Whatever you need.
You'll bring me coffee and stuff.
If you think I'm kidding, for an early draft of that book, Robert, there's not a lot I wouldn't do. So thank you for bringing this work into the world, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys, this is a weekly show, so if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe there. You can also find us at InsideQuest.com. We've got all kinds of extras from the show, blog posts, and all kinds of great stuff. So be sure to go there to find things that you didn't see here today on the show. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Until then, be great, my friends. Take care.
Coming up next, Inside Questions.
You mentioned that roughly 1 out of 10 people are expert manipulators. Do you find them to be the most successful people?
Well, there have been great books written about that, about psychopaths and how psychopaths are more powerful and successful in life. And the moment they overreach, the moment they do something wrong, everybody piles on and they go from the top to the bottom.